At 10:57 hours on June 19, 1864, Captain Raphael Semmes stood on the quarterdeck of CSS Alabama as she steamed out of Cherbourg Harbor toward open water. 7 miles ahead, USS Kearsarge waited. Semmes was 54 years old, 22 months of continuous cruising, 65 Union vessels captured or destroyed, 75,000 miles sailed across 3 oceans. Never once entering a Confederate port, his ship was dying beneath him. 2 years at sea without proper maintenance, hull fouled with marine growth, boilers corroded, powder deteriorating in tropical heat, coal bins filled with inferior French stock that produced more smoke than steam. But the French government had made itself clear. Alabama could not remain in Cherbourg. Kearsarge would not leave. The only way out was through. Semmes turned to his first officer. "We will engage." The story of CSS Alabama began 24 months earlier, not in the Confederacy, but in a shipyard on the River Mersey in Liverpool, England. British neutrality was official policy. British shipbuilders were less concerned with policy than profit. In July 1862, a vessel designated only as Hull 290 slid down the ways at Laird Brothers shipyard. On paper, she was a merchant ship bound for Spanish owners. In reality, every line of her design spoke a different truth. She was 220 feet long, 32 feet at the beam, 1,050 tons displacement. A 3-masted bark-rigged sailing ship with an auxiliary steam engine, 2 technologies, 1 purpose, maximum flexibility. When wind was favorable, she could make 10 knots under sail and conserve coal. When pursuit or escape demanded speed, her horizontal direct-acting engine could push her to 13 knots. This dual capability would prove essential. Union cruisers would spend 2 years chasing reports of a steam-powered raider, only to discover Alabama 500 miles away under full sail. Engine cold, no smoke to betray her position. Her armament reflected her true mission. 8 guns, 6 32-pounder broadside cannons, 1 110-pound Blakely rifled pivot gun forward, 1 8-inch smoothbore pivot gun aft. Enough firepower to outgun any merchant vessel, fast enough to outrun any warship that outgunned her. She was not built to fight naval battles, she was built to destroy commerce. On August 24, 1862, in the Azores, Raphael Semmes came aboard. He brought with him 20 officers and a crew of 80 men, mostly British sailors, recruited from Liverpool waterfront. They were not fighting for the Confederacy, they were fighting for wages and prize money. Semmes raised the Confederate ensign. Hull 290 became CSS Alabama. The first victim came 5 days later, the whaling ship Ocmulgee out of Martha's Vineyard. Semmes' pattern was established from the beginning. Fire a shot across the bow, board and inspect papers, evacuate crew, set fire and watch her burn. Ocmulgee carried a cargo of whale oil. She burned for 7 hours, visible for 40 miles. Semmes logged the capture and moved on. The mathematics of commerce raiding are simple. Every ship destroyed is cargo that never reaches port, insurance rates that increase, merchants who choose not to ship, capital that flows to safer flags. Alabama didn't need to sink the entire Union merchant fleet. She only needed to make Union shipping unprofitable. In the first 3 months, Semmes captured 20 vessels. He burned 18, released 2 on bond. Neutral cargo, promised payment to Confederate government after Southern victory. The bond system was legal under international maritime law. It would also prove completely worthless. The hunting grounds were vast. September found Alabama off Newfoundland banks, intercepting ships bound for Boston and New York. October brought her to the shipping lanes between Bermuda and the American coast. November, the Caribbean. Every captured ship yielded intelligence, bills of lading, cargo manifests, letters, newspapers. Semmes studied them meticulously. He was mapping Union commerce in real time, identifying patterns, predicting routes. He was also learning which cargoes mattered. Food, weapons, equipment bound for Union armies. These ships burned. Neutral cargoes, ships with foreign passengers, vessels from countries whose governments might take offense. These Semmes released on bond or with warnings. This was war, but it was also diplomacy. Alabama operated alone, 3,000 miles from any Confederate port. International law was her only protection. January 1863. The Gulf of Mexico. Alabama captured and burned USS Hatteras, a Union warship. It was Semmes' only naval engagement that ended in Union surrender. The fight lasted 13 minutes. Hatteras went down in shallow water off Galveston, her crew rescued before she sank. It proved something Semmes already knew. Alabama could fight warships if necessary, but fighting warships was not the mission. The Union Navy deployed 12 ships to hunt Alabama. They searched the Caribbean. They checked every port in the Atlantic. They followed rumors, investigated sightings, chased coal smoke that turned out to be merchant steamers. Alabama was never where they expected. Semmes resupplied from captured vessels, supplemented with stops in neutral ports: Jamaica, Brazil, Cape Town, Singapore. He took only what he needed, stayed only as long as international law permitted, moved before Union cruisers could arrive. By May 1863, Alabama had crossed the Atlantic, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and entered the Indian Ocean. The hunting grounds had changed, but the pattern had not. American merchant ships in the Far East trade, clippers bound for China, whalers working the Pacific. Semmes found them all, August 1863. The Straits of Sunda, between Java and Sumatra, one of the busiest shipping channels in the world. In 3 weeks, Alabama captured 11 vessels, 9 burned, 2 released. The insurance companies in Boston and New York were bleeding money. Merchant captains were transferring registry to British flags. Cargoes that once moved in American bottoms now traveled under foreign protection. This was the strategic objective. Not just destruction, displacement. Every barrel of flour, every bale of cotton, every ton of coal that moved under a foreign flag was revenue lost to the Union. It was shipbuilding contracts cancelled, sailors unemployed, maritime infrastructure weakening. The Union controlled the coasts and rivers of the Confederacy. Semmes was bleeding Union commerce worldwide in return, but the ship was suffering, 2 years without dry dock. Marine growth on the hull was slowing her, the copper sheathing that protected against shipworm and fouling was deteriorating, salt water was corroding her boilers. The engine was burning coal inefficiently, leaving more ash, producing less power. Seams were opening in the hull planking. She was still seaworthy, still capable, but her margins were shrinking. November 1863. Alabama crossed the Indian Ocean, rounded the Cape of Good Hope again, and turned north toward Europe. Semmes needed a port with repair facilities, a neutral nation with shipyards. France seemed the best option. Confederate agents in Europe were working diplomatic channels. Surely the French would permit repairs. The final 6 months brought Alabama back across the Atlantic. 6 more vessels captured, the SS Rockingham off the coast of France, her cargo of guano seized. The Tycoon near the English Channel burned. But the pace was slowing, coal quality was poor, engine performance was degrading. Alabama needed rest, she needed maintenance, she needed a safe harbor. On June 11, 1864, CSS Alabama steamed into Cherbourg Harbor and requested permission to use the dry dock. The French government was polite but firm. Repairs could be made, but not in military facilities and not indefinitely. International law required neutral nations to refuse extended sanctuary to belligerent warships. 3 days later, USS Kearsarge arrived outside the harbor. Captain John Winslow had been hunting Alabama for 18 months. Now she was trapped. Winslow anchored beyond French territorial waters and waited. Semmes faced 3 choices: remain in Cherbourg and eventually face internment by the French, attempt to escape under cover of darkness or weather, or fight. Internment meant losing the ship without firing a shot. Escape was possible but uncertain. Kearsarge was faster, better maintained, and could pursue indefinitely. Fighting meant facing a superior opponent, but on terms Semmes could choose. He chose to fight. The ships were nearly identical in size. Kearsarge, 1,461 tons, 7 guns. Alabama, 1,050 tons, 8 guns. But the equality was deceptive. Kearsarge had spent the war in Union ports, maintained by Navy shipwrights, supplied with quality powder and shot. Alabama had been at sea for 22 months, Fouled, corroded, weakened. Her powder had deteriorated. Her fuses were unreliable. Her crew, though experienced, were merchant sailors, not trained naval gunners. Winslow had one more advantage, unknown to Semmes. Kearsarge's vital machinery spaces were protected by sheet chains, draped over the sides and covered with wooden planking to disguise them. It was improvised armor, but it was enough to stop shell fragments and reduce penetration from solid shot. Sunday morning, June 19th. Clear weather, light wind. The French coast was lined with spectators. A pilot boat escorted Alabama out of the harbor. At the 3-mile limit, the pilot departed. Alabama steamed toward open water. Kearsarge turned to meet her. At 10:57, Alabama opened fire at 1,800 yards. The first broadside fell short. Kearsarge did not respond, continuing to close the distance. At 1,000 yards, Kearsarge turned to starboard, presenting her broadside. Both ships began a circular duel, turning to port, each trying to maintain optimal range while denying the other a raking shot. Alabama fired rapidly, 7 broadsides in the first 15 minutes, but rapid fire was not accurate fire. Her gunners were aiming high. Shells tore through Kearsarge's rigging, cut ropes, shredded sails. But they were missing the hull, missing the machinery, missing the vital targets that would decide the fight. Kearsarge fired slowly, methodically, aiming for the waterline. Her crew had trained for this. They knew their guns, they knew their ship, they knew their enemy was weakened. At 11:07, a shell from Kearsarge's 11-inch pivot gun struck Alabama at the waterline near the stern. It penetrated the hull, exploded inside, and opened a massive hole. Water began flooding the aft compartments. Semmes saw the danger immediately. His ship was taking on water faster than the pumps could handle. He ordered full sail set, attempting to reach shallow water where Alabama could be beached before sinking. But the wind was wrong. The current was against him, and Kearsarge was positioned perfectly to cut off any escape. At 11:12, another shell struck Alabama's engine room. The machinery was damaged, but still functional. Steam pressure was dropping, speed was bleeding away, the circle was tightening, the range was closing. Kearsarge's gunners were finding their rhythm. Alabama's shells continued to hit Kearsarge's hull, but the improvised chain armor was working. Shells that should have penetrated were stopped or deflected. Fragments that should have killed crew were absorbed by the wooden planking covering the chains. Kearsarge was being hit, but not hurt. At 11:15, one of Alabama's shells struck Kearsarge's sternpost. It was a perfect shot. Solid hit to a vital location. If the fuse had functioned correctly, the shell would have exploded inside Kearsarge's stern, destroyed her rudder, and left her helpless. Instead, the shell lodged in the wood without exploding. Defective powder. Deteriorated fuse. The story of Alabama's last months compressed into one failed explosion. The water was rising in Alabama's hold. The stern was settling. The bow was rising. Semmes' gun crews were standing in water as they loaded and fired. The range had closed to 400 yards. Kearsarge's shells were striking with devastating accuracy. Alabama's hull was shattered in multiple places. Flooding was uncontrollable. At 11:20, Semmes ordered the colors struck. The Confederate ensign came down. Alabama fired one last shot after the surrender. An accident, a gun crew that hadn't heard the order. Then silence. The fight had lasted 64 minutes. Alabama had fired approximately 370 rounds. Kearsarge had fired 173. The ship was sinking. Semmes ordered abandon ship. Boats were lowered. Wounded were placed in first. The crew jumped into the water. Some could swim. Some could not. Kearsarge launched boats to rescue survivors. A British yacht, Deerhound, watching from nearby, moved in to help. CSS Alabama settled by the stern. Water rushed through the shattered hull. The bow rose higher. Men were still jumping from the forward rigging. At 12:24, 2 hours and 27 minutes after the first shot was fired, Alabama slipped beneath the surface. She went down in 190 feet of water, 7 miles off the French coast. Casualties. Alabama lost 19 killed in action and 21 wounded. Kearsarge suffered 3 wounded, none killed. Of Alabama's crew, 41 were rescued by Kearsarge, 42 by Deerhound, which immediately steamed for England, carrying Semmes and his surviving officers beyond Union capture. The career of CSS Alabama, 22 months, 75,000 nautical miles, 3 oceans, 65 Union vessels captured or destroyed. Estimated damage to Union commerce, $6,443,000 in 1864 dollars, equivalent to approximately $110 million today. 0 visits to Confederate ports, 0 resupply from Confederate logistics, entirely self-sustaining through captured resources and neutral port access. The strategic impact extended beyond simple mathematics. By 1865, more than 700 Union merchant vessels had transferred to foreign registry to avoid Confederate raiders. American maritime supremacy was broken. It would take decades to rebuild. The Alabama and her sister raiders had accomplished what Confederate armies could not. They had struck the Union economy directly and inflicted damage that persisted long after the war ended. Raphael Semmes returned to the Confederacy and was promoted to admiral. He commanded Confederate naval forces in Richmond until the city fell. After the war, he was briefly imprisoned but never tried. He died in 1877, age 68. John Winslow was promoted to Commodore and remained in the Navy until his retirement. He died in 1873. In 1872, the United States filed claims against Great Britain for allowing Confederate raiders to be built in British shipyards. The Alabama Claims Tribunal awarded the United States $15.5 million in gold, one of the first major international arbitrations in modern history. Britain paid. The precedent established would influence international law for the next century. The wreck of CSS Alabama remained undisturbed until 1984, when a French Navy minesweeper discovered the site. Archaeological expeditions have recovered artifacts: cannons, anchor, ship's bell, personal effects. They rest now in museums. The ship herself remains on the bottom, off Cherbourg, where she fought and died. What makes Alabama's story resonate is not the destruction she inflicted, but the audacity of her existence. A warship with no home port, a raider with no supply line, a Confederate vessel that never saw the Confederacy. She was proof that naval warfare had entered a new era, an era where speed, intelligence, and international law mattered more than battle lines and territorial waters. For 22 months, one ship and one captain held the attention of the United States Navy, disrupted global commerce, and demonstrated that the ocean itself was a battlefield without borders. CSS Alabama was never the most powerful ship afloat, but she was, without question, one of the most effective.